Chapter 3. Jeff Gets a Job. Next to Jeff Bezos' picture in the 1987 Princeton yearbook is a rather bold and enigmatic quote from science fiction writer Ray Bradbury. "The universe says no to us." It reads, "We in answer fire a broadside of flesh at it and cry yes." Bezos found it to be an inspiring credo for his life. He refused to take no as an answer to anything, especially when it came to finding a job. But he was quite willing to say no to the corporations that asked him to join them. Semiconductor powerhouse Intel corporations wooed him, as did Bell Labs, the highly regarded research arm of AT&T. Even the corporate consulting firm, Anderson Consulting, put in a bid. He has said he considered becoming an entrepreneur right out of Princeton. But, he said, he ultimately decided that it would be smarter to wait and learn a little bit more about business and the way the world works. If he felt he wasn't quite ready to become an entrepreneur yet, for one thing, he didn't know what kind of company he wanted to start, he would at least set off on a path that would lead to his own company. And that meant joining up with another entrepreneurial company. He decided to take a leap of faith with Fitel because it was young, risky, and challenging. So he packed up and moved to Manhattan. Fitel's founders, Graciela Chichelniski and Jeffrey Heel, were professors in the economics department at Columbia University. The company, says Professor Chichelniski, was trying to build something like a mini-internet before the internet became popular. In fact, this was nearly a decade before the internet took off and changed everybody's lives, including Bezos's. The system Fitel was building, called Equinet, linked different computers at brokerage firms, investment firms, and banks over a network to allow them to conduct stock trades among themselves. Fitel was focused on Wall Street investors, the first in a string of such companies that Jeff would join. Contrary to popular belief, however, he was not himself an investment banker. It was a time when investment banks were trying to harness computer power to increase the efficiency of their trades, a trend that continues even today. It was Jeff's knack for wrangling computer code that the companies were after. Fitel had hired 15 extremely smart young computer scientists, including Jeff, who was employee number 11. Jeff worked on the communications protocols, a key and complicated part of the system that enabled different, incompatible computer networks to understand and exchange data with each other. The communications protocols were the most challenging, says Chichelniski. She designed the system and Jeff built it. It was damn well engineered because Jeff did it himself, she says. He was one of the best communications engineers I had. It didn't seize, it didn't hang up. It worked. Period. If the universe didn't say no to the system, most people in the industry did. They didn't believe it could be done. The system was first installed at Salomon Brothers, sending thousands of trades back and forth through the network to varied computers at different banks. It was so impressive and worked so well, says Chichelniski, that the traders had trouble accepting that it was real. Solomon thought it was a trick, she recalls. They couldn't believe it was happening. In less than a year, Jeff was promoted from a manager-level position of administration and development to an associate director position of technology and business development. That essentially made him second in command at the firm. At 23 years old, Jeff was managing a dozen programmers in Fitel's different offices. Nevertheless, he was a restless soul, still hoping to expand his horizons and learn the secrets of becoming an entrepreneur. A year after Bezos joined her firm, Chichelniski left to raise her young child. 1 year after she left, Bezos followed suit. It was April 1988, just 2 years after he'd joined Fitel. He joined Bankers Trust, another company working at the intersection of computers and finance, as he put it. He started out as an assistant vice president and became Bankers Trust's youngest vice president at 26, 10 months after joining the firm, running yet another engineering department that created a communications network, this one called BT World. This software program was installed on PCs on desktops at 100 large corporations, allowing them to communicate with Bankers Trust's computers. That allowed BT's clients to remotely track the performance of the pension funds and profit-sharing plans that BT invested and managed for them. It replaced the periodic paper reports that the bank used to mail to its clients. Instead, the bank was able to deliver up-to-the-minute performance results electronically. Once again, this was something that people in the status quo thought couldn't be done, especially on the primitive PCs of the time, which most people considered to be little better than toys. Many people at the bank thought that this was something that couldn't be done, that shouldn't be done, and that the traditional way of delivering the reports in hard copy was better, recalled Harvey Hirsch, a former vice president at Bankers Trust and Jeff's boss at the time. Some of them were vehemently opposed to what he was proposing, said Hirsch. But Jeff wore down the resistance. He sees different ways of doing things and better ways of doing things, said Hirsch. He told the naysayers, I believe in this new technology, and I'm going to show you how it's going to work. And he did. At the end of the day, he proved them all wrong. He had no trouble puncturing someone's balloon if he thinks they're proposing to do something the wrong way or in an inappropriate way. He'll argue his point of view very persuasively. That doesn't mean that he didn't break some eggs in the process because he proved people wrong. But I don't think he ever did it in a way that angered or infuriated people. It was all very professional. During Jeff's time at Bankers Trust, he also kept an eye out for the opportunity to become a true entrepreneur. And it almost happened. In 1989, he met a Merrill Lynch investment banking analyst named Halsey Minor, another young man with aspirations of becoming an entrepreneur. Minor had been building an internal network for Merrill that could link information, graphics, and animation together, much like today's Internet. He decided the project could be spun out as a separate business. Merrill Lynch gave Minor money to start his own company in order to build the network. But Minor became more ambitious. He wanted to create a network that would send news stories to subscribers based on their individual interests. Jeff linked up with him on the project in 1990, and Merrill considered providing funding for the company. Bezos and Minor, 26 and 25 respectively, seemed to be heading down the entrepreneurial path. But that venture was not meant to be. Within a few weeks, Merrill executives decided not to provide funds. Both men did later become successful entrepreneurs anyway. Minor went on to start the CNET news service, which he later sold, becoming a millionaire. With his first entrepreneurial hopes dashed, Bezos began looking for a more challenging technical and business opportunity. He wanted to get out of financial services and into something more entrepreneurial and technologically focused, a company that could bring about a new wave of automation that would revolutionize business. He sent out his resume to headhunters. But this time he wanted a real technology company, not another Wall Street firm. One of the headhunters called him and said, I know you said you would kill me if I even proposed the finance thing, but there's this opportunity that's actually a very unusual financial company. That company was D.E. Shaw. It was founded in 1988 by David Shaw to create a newfangled computer automated trading system for Wall Street. Shaw was a computer science professor at Columbia University who was lured to Wall Street to help computerize stock trading systems, and then started his own company. At the time, computer software was already being used to track small differences in stock prices around the world, allowing arbitrageurs to buy the stock at one price and immediately sell it for a profit at the higher price. But the traders still had to analyze the data and make the trades. Shaw's computer systems took the humans out of the equation. As soon as the computer system found price discrepancies, it would automatically buy and sell the stocks in a fraction of the time a human could do it. That gave firms who used the system a substantial advantage in the split-second trading world of arbitrage. David Shaw was the kind of man Jeff could relate to. He had earned a PhD in computer science from Stanford. From there, he became an assistant professor of computer science at Columbia University, doing research on massively parallel supercomputers, in which hundreds of computers are linked together to work as one giant computer. Morgan Stanley lured him into electronic trading by offering him 6 times his professor's salary and enormous financial resources. A year and a half later, he decided he could do more interesting things in computer trading on his own, and started D.E. Shaw. His company developed a reputation as an incredible place for mathematicians and computer scientists to work, one that only hired about 1% of those who applied. Jeff was one who was accepted into this elite group. The Wall Street Journal described D.E. Shaw as being in the vanguard of computerized selling, while Fortune magazine called it the most technologically sophisticated firm on Wall Street, and added that David Shaw's reputation was an amalgam of Einstein, Midas, and Rasputin. Bezos liked him. Years later, he described Shaw as one of those people who has a completely developed left brain and a completely developed right brain. He's artistic, articulate, and analytical. It's just a pleasure to talk to someone like that. The feeling was mutual. Shaw described Bezos as a pleasurable person to talk to, who was also very entrepreneurial. He was the last person Jeff would ever work for. Bezos was 26 years old when he was hired, in December 1990, in the position of vice president. He was promoted to senior vice president a few years later. One of 4 managers at Shaw, he created and led a 24-person team exploring new market opportunities. Still, Jeff was an unusual corporate executive. With a highly technical mind and methodical approach to business, he struck some of the people he worked for as a bit strange. What got him ahead was his ability to take in the big picture as well as deal with the most demanding details. Bezos has no limits, says former boss Chichelnisky. It's the most amazing thing. He has no psychological barriers. Halsey Minor would agree with Chichelnisky. 8 years after their ill-fated venture together, the Silicon Valley magazine, Red Herring, ran a feature story listing the top 20 entrepreneurs of 1997. Both Minor and Bezos made the list. In that feature, Minor was quoted praising Bezos' multiple talents. Outside of Bill Gates, I think there are few other people who share Jeff's deep technical understanding and combined it with highly refined strategic and tactical instincts, he said. Minor also told the UK publication, The Independent, Jeff is one of the few hardcore developers who can do other things. He also noted that he always had the dream of starting his own company. Some people found Bezos to be very personable. Others did not. Chichelnisky thought he was a bit cold. I didn't think he was a very nice person, says Chichelnisky. I liked him, but he was not warm. I'm not criticizing him, not a bit. It was like he could be a Martian for all I knew. A well-meaning, nice Martian. Being something of a Martian and dedicated to his work, he was not the most sought-after bachelor in Manhattan. So he decided to spice up his love life and become what he was later to describe as a professional dater. He took a particularly geeky approach to the problem. Having always been the methodical type, he set about trying to find a great girlfriend by using the same methodology that Wall Street bankers use to find a great investment. He set up a deal flow chart. Wall Streeters' deal flow charts are listings of all the attributes a deal must have before they will take a chance on it, in order to remain objective and not be influenced by an emotional response. Likewise, Jeff's women flow chart listed the criteria his potential partners had to have before he would consummate a deal. The number 1 criterion was that I wanted a woman who could get me out of a third-world prison, he later said. He figured that was the best way to get the idea across. What I really wanted was someone resourceful. But nobody knows what you mean when you say, I'm looking for a resourceful woman. If I tell somebody I'm looking for a woman who can get me out of a third-world prison, they start thinking Ross Perot. They have something they can hang their hat on. Most straight men would not find H. Ross Perot a former dealmaker and one-time presidential candidate, to be the model for their ideal girlfriend's mentality. But to Jeff, it meant efficiency. "Life's too short to hang out with people who aren't resourceful," he said. For some reason, the women flowchart didn't work. But Bezos also ended up with another perk from D.E. Shaw. Without the aid of a women flowchart, he met Mackenzie Tuttle, one of his research associates at the firm. Also a graduate of Princeton in 1992, she was an aspiring writer and former research assistant to novelist Toni Morrison, as Morrison was working on Jazz. Although she has never said how she might spring Jeff from a third-world prison, he was impressed with his young researcher. Mackenzie was working on a novel of her own, titled The Testing of Luther Albright. It got a review from Morrison, although it currently doesn't quite make it within the top 2 million best-selling books on Amazon. They were married in 1993, and Bezos' life marched on toward his real goal, finally becoming an entrepreneur. Chapter 4. Jeff discovers the Internet. David Shaw ended up being the one who set Bezos off on the path that led to opportunity. In 1994, he asked Bezos to look at this new thing becoming all the buzz, something called the Internet. It was a piece of technology that seemed to be coming together with elements that just might create opportunities for a company that used computer networks to conduct stock trades. Until recently, the Internet had been mostly used as a network that allowed universities, research labs, and government institutions to exchange information. One key step toward change was taken in 1990, when Tim Berners-Lee created the first Internet browser, called World Wide Web. Another came in 1991, when the Internet was opened up to commercial use for the first time. It took several more years before these changes caught on and spread to popular awareness. In 1993, a government-funded group at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign created a new generation of web browser called Mosaic, a wonderful graphics-based browser. The following year, a very astute Silicon Valley venture capitalist named John Doerr decided to recruit a bright young man, Mark Andreessen, from the Mosaic team in Illinois to move to Silicon Valley and start a web browser company. That same year, the company, called Netscape, launched its browser, Navigator. Shaw decided the Internet had a future, and gave Bezos the task of finding the opportunities there. In the spring of 1994, he began researching the Internet, and was impressed with what he found. Primarily, he says, he came across an important statistic. The Internet was growing at 2,300% a year. You know, things just don't grow that fast. It's highly unusual, and that started me thinking. What kind of business plan might make sense in the context of that growth? Those numbers sound incredibly impressive, although that growth was starting from a very small base. An annual growth rate of 2,300% annually simply means the population grows by a factor of 23 every year. How impressive that is depends on the starting point. A club of 100 people that grows by 2,300% annually, for example, ends up with 2,400 members after a year. But those numbers quickly get crazy, assuming that growth rate continues. After the third year of growth, the club would boast 1.4 million members. Similarly, from a very small base, a bacterial infection can quickly turn into billions of infectious organisms, an arithmetic phenomenon of which Bezos was fully aware. I had never seen anything grow so fast, and I don't think many people had, except for perhaps in a petri dish, he said in a speech to the Commonwealth Club in Silicon Valley. That's great for bacteria. Such growth rates, however, are not sustainable outside of a petri dish. International Data Corporation has numbers going back to December 1995, when it estimates that 16 million people were using the Internet. IDC puts the Internet population at 36 million at the end of 1996, for a growth rate of just 125%. Growth was just under 100% for the next 2 years. Still, that doesn't take away from Jeff's ability to recognize a good thing growing when he saw it. The short version of the story is simply that Jeff knew there would be a huge internet population in short order. IDC says there are more than 1.7 billion people online these days, which is approaching 1/4 of the world's population. Fast growth means opportunity in most people's dreams. Twitter accounts, for example, grew by 1,500% in 2009, although it has not figured out how to make a profit off that growth. Jeff's job, and his genius, was to find a way to make a fortune off this phenomenon. Shaw recognized it as well. By 1996, D.E. Shaw was spinning off internet companies, including the free, ad-supported email service called Juno and Farsight, an online service with aspirations of managing everybody's finances through Shaw's website, including banking, brokerage, and insurance services. But the most outstanding spin-off from D.E. Shaw was the one Jeff kept for himself. Most successful entrepreneurs start a company because they're passionate about the business they want to enter. Bill Gates creating software with the goal of putting a computer on everyone's desk. Steve Jobs pioneering a new personal computer with a design that would set gold standards. Or Larry Page and Sergey Brin creating a search engine that could bring all the world's information to everyone. But Bezos was simply interested in the fact that growth of the internet meant somebody was going to make a fortune or two from the phenomenon, and he wanted one for himself. He didn't set out to build the world's biggest bookstore simply because he loved books, although he does love them, as shown by his voracious appetite for books in his youth. He wanted to simply create a hit company by leveraging his business and technology skills. It didn't matter what the business was, as long as it had huge potential. He realized the internet would become an enormous gathering place, and where people gathered, there was an opportunity to sell them something, if one understood the unique characteristics of that new environment and figured out how to exploit it properly. He began to dream of becoming the world's largest internet retailer, perhaps the world's largest retailer, period. But he also realized that the best approach was to start by focusing on one market, to figure out the needs of that market and match them to the needs and capabilities of the internet. Once he was established in one market, he would be able to figure out other markets as well. His big challenge was to figure out what product to sell. To answer that question, he created a deal flowchart to analyze several opportunities. He made a list of 20 possible products. Which one offered the best set of features for quickly building an internet presence? I was looking for something that you could only do online, something that couldn't be replicated in the physical world, he said. The answer turned out to be books. Imagine the criteria an ambitious young executive with a penchant for computers would put on a deal flow list. Familiar product. Everyone knows what a book is. When ordering a particular title online, nobody has to worry about whether it is a cheap knockoff or an imitation, as they might with, say, consumer electronics. Large market size. Computer software and music might be reasonable bets. In 1994, according to U.S. Census Bureau data, nearly $7 billion worth of PC software applications were sold in North American retail stores in 1994. That same year, however, $19 billion worth of books were sold in the United States. Further, almost $2 billion of the software applications sold that year were produced by just one publisher, Microsoft. Entering the software business would make Jeff heavily dependent on just one producer, making it difficult to negotiate price reductions. As for music, there were 300,000 CD titles for sale, compared to 3 million different books available around the world. Books are incredibly unusual in one respect, and that is that there are more items in the book category than there are in any other category by far, he was later to recall. In 1994, 513 million copies of books were sold, and 17 bestsellers sold over 1 million copies. And on average, American consumers spent $79 per person on books in 1994, compared to $56 per person on recorded music. Competition. There were two large bookstore chains, Barnes & Noble and Borders Group, with a combined market share of 25%. An uncountable number of independent bookstores accounted for another 21% of sales. The remainder were not sold through bookstores at all, but through other outlets such as supermarkets, general-purpose retailers, book clubs, and mail-order catalogs. Most bookstores also carried a very limited inventory. Although they could easily order a book if a customer wanted it, that's just not as satisfying in an instant gratification world. Barnes & Noble and Borders were converting large structures, such as bowling alleys and movie theaters, into 60,000-square-foot superstores, but even these carried no more than 175,000 titles. The growing popularity of mail-order books also provided a basis on which to build a virtual bookstore. As for direct competition, there were a couple of online offerings already, but they were primitive approaches. In 1991, a handful of specialty book publishers and retailers, such as Computer Literacy Bookstore, clbooks.com, O'Reilly & Associates, ora.com, and the Stanford University Bookstore, allowed the few people with online accounts, using online bulletin boards or pre-web internet communications systems, to order books through email. In 1992, a startup called naturallybooks.com launched a similar service, and the following year posted an online database of 40,000 titles. There was clearly room for a more sophisticated system of online book selling. Acquiring inventory. Most importantly, there was a ready source of wholesale books. Two distributors, Ingram Book Group and Baker & Taylor, dominated the market. Their warehouses contained about 400,000 titles. Small, independent bookstores relied on these distributors, rather than the publishers, to supply them with titles, and Jeff could tap into this ready source. The distributors both had warehouses located strategically around the U.S. and could deliver books within a couple of days. When customers requested books that a store did not stock, most bookstores ordered the books from one of those two distributors. Creating a database of books for sale. Finally, the wholesalers had already set the stage for the digital age. Bezos attended a meeting of the American Booksellers Association, ABA, and discovered that all books for sale were given an ISBN number. The ISBN, International Standard Book Number, was created in the 1960s, then standardized by the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, in 1970. That made it easier to create a database of books and search for them by their ISBN numbers. In the late 1980s, Ingram and Baker & Taylor had upgraded their inventory list from microfiche, which an individual had to scan through manually, to a digital format that clerks could search through on a computer. It seemed to Bezos as if all the information about books had been meticulously organized so it could be put online. Discount opportunities. In the early 1990s, Crown Books had opened up hundreds of discount stores, forcing the major booksellers to follow suit for the first time. But the cost of real estate for the stores and the cost of maintaining inventories meant their ability to discount books and still make a profit was limited. An online store that could order books directly from the distributors instead of keeping its own inventory would have a huge price advantage. Shipping costs. Like software and music CDs, books are easy to ship through the mail at book rates or with overnight delivery services. At 8 ounces to a couple pounds, a book is heavier than a CD or software, depending on the size of the manual, but lighter than computers or many other consumer electronics products. Online potential. Finally, software programs could sort, search, and organize book titles in categories, making them easier to find and buy online. The largest bookstores carried just 175,000 titles. But Bezos knew that software could sort through 1 million titles in a database, as long as he had a couple of reasonably powerful computers. Jeff was amazed by what he found when he analyzed the potential of selling different products online. Books appeared to be, by far, the most eligible partner for a dance with e-commerce. To most people, the idea would seem too simple to start a revolution. In reality, what Jeff created was simply a mail-order book service that used the internet to place orders. But he knew it could be a very big system for placing orders. "I didn't think of it," John Ingram, chairman of Ingram Book Company, was later to confess. "Before 1995, I'm not sure I knew what the internet was." Jeff told David Shaw that he had found the right opportunity, but selling books was a big leap for a financial services firm, and Shaw apparently rejected the idea. Jeff thought about it and decided this was an opportunity he couldn't pass by. He told Shaw he was going to start a company on his own, and Shaw took him on a long walk to try to talk him out of it. Why leave a stable, high-paying job with substantial bonuses for the vagaries and uncertainty of a startup? Of course, Shaw had done the same thing when he started his company, but Jeff considered this argument deeply. Once again, the nerdy, list-making aspect of his personality helped him decide. In a speech at Lake Forest College in 1998, where he was given an honorary degree, Jeff recalled that he created a regret minimization framework. Once he was old and looking back on his life, what would he regret the most if he made either decision? "A lot of people live their lives this way," he confessed. But he added, "Very few are nerdy and dorky enough to call it a regret minimization framework, but that was what I came up with." His conclusion? "I knew that when I was 80, there was no chance that I would regret having walked away from my 1994 Wall Street bonus in the middle of the year. I wouldn't even have remembered that. But I did think there was a chance that I might regret significantly not participating in this thing called the Internet, that I believed passionately in. I also knew that if I had tried and failed, I wouldn't regret that." Once he made that decision, he knew it was time to go, and go quickly. "When something is growing 2,300% a year, you have to move fast," he said in his speech. "A sense of urgency becomes your most valuable asset." He knew that the company that got the earliest start would have the easiest time capturing the early customers and making a name for the business. So he told Shaw he decided to start a company to sell books online and gave notice. It was the summer of 1994. Now that he had his idea for a new company, and a way to make it work with the new technology the Internet was likely to provide, he had to start building a company. That meant finding some people to help him. Fortunately, his years in business had provided the connections he needed to find some good people. More importantly, he had the self-confidence of Muhammad Ali, the enthusiasm of John Kennedy, and the brains of Thomas Edison. He had what was needed to persuade others to join him in his bold new quest. Chapter 5. 3 Nerds and an Accountant. The Internet is like alcohol in some sense. It accentuates what you would do anyway. If you want to be a loner, you can be more alone. If you want to connect, it makes it easier to connect. Esther Dyson. The first step in building a company is to find good people, and that can be a problem. How does one convince people to join a venture with almost no funding and aspirations to create the world's biggest bookstore without actually creating a physical store and without actually stocking any books? Bezos' original idea was that he could simply order a book from the distributors once he had a buyer, and turn around and ship it off to the customer as soon as it arrived at his warehouse. The process begins by tapping your business connections. It's often a matter of moving from one person to another, and from that person to yet another. It's a process encapsulated today in online networks such as the LinkedIn social networking site, where your connections can introduce you to other connections, who can introduce you to still more connections. Bezos didn't have LinkedIn, but he had made a lot of business connections, and he was good at exploiting them by phone. Bezos was prohibited from hiring people from D.E. Shaw, but he could use his comrades there as a starting point. Mackenzie wasn't the only happy connection Bezos had from Shaw. Another was a guy named Peter Laventhal. Since Bezos was looking for engineers, Laventhal told him about a friend from grad school at Stanford, a guy named Herb, who was living in California and kicking around his own ideas for an internet-based business with a friend. And that friend was Sheldon J. Shell Kapan, a well-known engineer who had been bouncing from startup to startup in Silicon Valley in search of one that would become the next Apple computer. It was early 1994. Kapan had a BA in mathematics from the University of California in Santa Cruz, the laid-back university in surfer town where he grew up. But by the mid-1990s, Santa Cruz, 70 miles down the coast from San Francisco and 35 miles southwest of San Jose, had become something of a Silicon Valley suburb. Several technology companies had moved or grown up there, and people, like Kapan, who preferred the coastal, hippie-ish culture of Santa Cruz, commuted to Silicon Valley. Kapan's reputation as a superb programmer had spread throughout Silicon Valley over the 20 years he had worked there, but he had not yet ended up at a successful startup where he can make his fortune. It wasn't from a lack of trying. In 1985, he became senior scientist at Lucid Inc., an artificial intelligence software company founded a year earlier by scientists from Lawrence Livermore National Labs, Carnegie Mellon University, and MIT. Kapan left in 1989, and Lucid went bankrupt in 1994. Kapan then joined another high-profile company, one-year-old Frox Inc., as senior software developer. Frox was developing revolutionary home entertainment systems, including the much-publicized Frox Wand, a one-button universal remote. Frox had attracted engineers from Lucasfilm, DroidWorks, Xerox PARC, Sun Microsystems, and Apple Computer. But Frox didn't have the design flair of Steve Jobs. Kapan lasted about 3 years. The company lasted 20. In 1992, Kapan joined Kaleida Labs, a joint venture between Apple and IBM, which created a digital multimedia player for computers, and wanted to create a similar program for television set-top boxes. Founded in 1991, it was folded into Apple in 1995. In the spring of 1994, just about the time Bezos was looking for an idea that he could turn into a good web-based business, Herb and Shell were doing the same thing. But the pair felt that they knew what their previous startups had lacked. We were primarily technical people, and we knew enough to know we needed to link up with a good business person, recalls Kapan. We knew that whatever we did, we would need help with fundraising, marketing, and management at least. Herb and Shell started tapping their own networks to find that business person. They reached out to Laventhal, who passed the information on to Bezos. Jeff flew out to Santa Cruz to meet them. The trio met for breakfast at a cafe in Santa Cruz to exchange ideas. They got along well. I thought Jeff was energetic and primed to succeed, with a history of succeeding, Kapan wrote to me in an email. He seemed, when I met him, to be cheerful of disposition and with a good sense of humor. He was also obviously well-versed in the ways of the financial community, and I thought that was key to success, as I had worked for a number of places where the management lacked a sufficient degree of skill in that area. It seemed at the beginning that he was willing to trust me to do my job and would give me the space to do it in the best way that I saw fit, which was important to me. Mainly, he says, Bezos struck him as someone who was born and bred to be successful. Kapan also liked the idea of creating an online bookstore. While less ambitious than the highly advanced technology his previous startups were trying to commercialize, it seemed to have a better chance of succeeding. Having worked for a large number of more technologically oriented startups that didn't do so well, I liked the idea of one in which I could easily describe where the revenue stream was going to come from, he recalls. At that time, both Jeff and I believed Amazon could succeed as a relatively small business compared to what it eventually became. I liked that too. Plus, it reminded Kapan of an enjoyable, although brief, time he had spent in 1970 working for Stewart Brand's Whole Earth Truck Store, precursor of the Whole Earth catalog. I saw Amazon's mission as a continuation of certain aspects of that same mission, to supply hard-to-find tools, mainly information-based tools, to a far-flung clientele who might not have easy access to those tools in their local communities, he says. Bezos offered to hire both Kapan and Herb. Kapan even started looking around for office space in Santa Cruz, hoping that Bezos might decide to put down his entrepreneurial roots there. The conversation between Bezos, Kapan, and his friend lasted for several months as Bezos made his plans. Bezos had not yet decided where to base his company. While most entrepreneurs were moving to Silicon Valley as the obvious place to become an entrepreneur, Jeff took a different approach. Yes, he would create another deal flow list to help decide. He came up with 3 criteria. It had to be a place with an established population of entrepreneurs and software programmers. He wanted to locate the business in a state with a relatively low population because only residents of that state would have to pay sales tax on the products he sold. He wanted a city near a warehouse run by one of the major book distributors so he could get supplies quickly. But the city also had to be a major metropolitan hub, with an airport offering a lot of daily flights so he could deliver books to his customers quickly. The city that best suited the criteria was not in Silicon Valley. Bezos found that Seattle, Washington, the birthplace of Microsoft, best fit the bill. Because of Microsoft, Seattle was becoming a major technology center, attracting other research centers from tech companies such as Nintendo and Adobe Systems, and was spinning off entrepreneurial companies, including the streaming media company Real Networks, then called Progressive Networks, started by a former Microsoft executive. In many ways, the greater Seattle area was a younger version of Silicon Valley, and certainly a much cheaper place to live. And Ingram Book Group's largest U.S. distribution center was a short 6-hour drive away in Roseburg, Oregon. Seattle was also the home of Nicholas J. Hanauer, a friend of one of Bezos's former Shaw colleagues. Hanauer was a senior executive at his family's business, Pacific Coast Feather Company. The company provided feathers for pillows, comforters, and mattress pads. In fact, it provided a lot of feathers, enough to bring in $200 million a year in revenues. Hanauer was doing well. One day, Hanauer decided to visit a friend in Manhattan. The friend invited Bezos along for lunch with him and Hanauer. Although they probably didn't have many mutual business interests between bird feathers and computer networks, Jeff and Hanauer hit it off. A couple of years later, when Hanauer heard that Bezos was going to start an e-commerce company, he called him in Manhattan. Hanauer told Bezos that he was interested in investing, that Seattle was the center of the universe, and that Bezos should move out there to create his new company. That gave an even stronger incentive for moving to Seattle. But from this point on, the story becomes less certain. The well-known scenario is that Bezos didn't know where they would end up, even as he and Mackenzie packed up and prepared to leave Manhattan in the summer of 1994. He was apparently also contemplating sites in Nevada. Another legend about Jeff's fondness for taking bold risks recounts that when the moving company packing up his Manhattan apartment asked for the destination, Jeff told them to just start driving west, while he and Mackenzie got in a 1988 Chevy Blazer donated by his father and did the same. It turns out that story is a bit of an abbreviation. Jeff and Mackenzie flew to Texas to get the car and drove from there. The day after they left, Jeff made up his mind and called Hanauer, said he was on his way, and asked if he could store his things at Hanauer's house. Then he called the movers with their destination. Jeff and Mackenzie arrived about a week after their furniture. Kapan was disappointed that Bezos didn't choose California. The change of venue from Santa Cruz made it a lot harder for me to decide to do it, he says. In fact, his friend Herb decided not to make the move. But Kapan decided to throw his programming talents into the pool. I was convinced to join because I believed in the mission of making a wide selection of books available to people all over the world, because I believed that I could have a significant part in making it happen, and that Jeff was someone who was likely to succeed. I also thought it was going to be fun. and I was tired of the kind of jobs that were available to me in Silicon Valley. So Kapan rented a U-Haul to move some of his possessions to Washington. Still, he kept his house and much of his furniture in Santa Cruz, just in case the whole thing failed. Kapan was Amazon.com's first employee and a key partner in launching the business. Within a couple of years, he made a fortune when Amazon went public. He stayed for 5 years. Bezos also had to decide what to call the company. He would need a name if he was going to incorporate a business. On his drive west, he called a Seattle attorney whom Hanauer had recommended, Todd Tarbert, to incorporate the company, and told him the name was to be Cadabra Inc., a play on the magician's chant of abracadabra. It was apparent that name was a problem when Tarbert asked, "Cadaver?" I thought, "Oh boy, that's not going to work," Bezos recalled. When Kapan moved from California and found out the name of the company he was joining, he said the discovery almost caused me to return to Santa Cruz. But Cadabra was incorporated in July 1994, just as Jeff and Mackenzie arrived in Seattle. 7 months later, Jeff chose Amazon for a new name because it began with an A, would come up high in any alphabetical listings, and because, as the world's largest river, it reflected his ambitions for his company. Plus, it was easy to spell. One of the things that people don't think about but is really important is that online, you get to places by being able to spell their name, he noted. But he insisted it always be referred to as Amazon.com to show that it was a new breed of business. Amazon became the first successful .com company before the .com crash turned it into a derogatory term. Jeff and Mackenzie spent 5 days at Hanauer's house before finding their own 3-bedroom rental at 10704 Northeast 28th Street in the Seattle suburb of Bellevue. It cost them $890 a month. He chose it in part because it had one crucial requirement, a garage, so that Jeff could boast of having a garage startup like Silicon Valley legends from Hewlett-Packard on. The garage had actually been converted into a recreation room, but Jeff figured it was close enough. "We thought it was important for that garage startup legitimacy," he said. "Unfortunately, it was an enclosed garage, so we didn't get the full legitimacy. But it did have no insulation and a huge black pot-bellied stove for heat right in the center of the garage." The house was later sold in 1998 for $182,000. In 2009, because of the growth of the technology business in Seattle and the appreciation in the cost of living in the area, it was sold for $625,000. Neither buyer knew its history as Amazon.com's birthplace, although both buyers worked at technology companies. Ready to start work on his startup, Bezos needed a business plan, of course. Or did he? Another Bezos legend claims that Jeff wrote his business plan on a laptop in the passenger seat while Mackenzie drove from Manhattan to Seattle. Others at Amazon, however, have said that he still hadn't finished writing his plan a year after the company was started. He managed to start a company without a business plan because he didn't need to raise money yet. Ever wonder how entrepreneurs get so rich? The wealthiest, like Microsoft's Bill Gates, managed to build up some value in their company before asking venture capitalists for cash. Gates did that by creating a company that was almost immediately profitable. Amazon.com represented a new approach to entrepreneurship, one that would be used by thousands of .com companies in the late 1990s. He went for years without a profit, or even trying to become profitable. Instead, Bezos used his own money. Having been well paid in his previous jobs, he had enough savings to fund the company for several months. In 1994, Bezos bought 10.2 million shares of Amazon.com stock for $10,000, or 1/10 of a penny per share. When Amazon.com went public 3 years later, at $18 per share, this initial investment from Bezos was worth almost $184 million. $10,000, however, doesn't get you far. By the end of 1994, he had also given Amazon.com interest-free loans totaling $44,000. Fortunately, he had friends and family to help out as well. In February 1995, he raised just over $100,000 by selling 582,528 shares to his father, Miguel Bezos, for 17.17 cents per share, enough to keep the company running for the first 6 or 7 months. His family was willing to invest because they had as much faith in him as he did himself. His mother has said the family invested in Jeff, not in the concept he was pitching, since they had never heard of the internet before. Bezos knew that only about 10% of startups succeed even modestly, but gave himself about a 30% chance, and told his parents up front that those were the odds. He told his family they should only make the investment if they were prepared to lose it. That kind of honesty is crucial for an entrepreneur, who might otherwise be too intimidated by the odds of failure to make the risky moves necessary to win. That's actually a very liberating expectation, expecting to fail, he has said. Of course, his family made out very well in the end. That $100,000 worth of stock would be worth over $10 million in a couple of years. When Jeff got to Seattle, he looked around for other smart software jockeys recommended to him by friends and colleagues. He tapped the University of Washington Computer Science and Engineering Department, which had a great reputation in computing. Brian Bershad, who headed UW's Science and Engineering Department, was skeptical of the venture when Bezos told him about it. But he circulated an email to people affiliated with his department, and one person decided to take a chance. Paul Barton Davis. He reverted to his original name of Paul Davis after his divorce from his wife in 2001, but is now so famous on the internet by the previous name that it still sticks to him. Davis was a molecular biologist from London who immigrated to Seattle in 1989 and became a software engineer. At a Seattle company called ScenicSoft, Inc., he designed programs for the open-source Unix software system, the operating system Amazon.com would also use. In the fall of 1993, he joined the UW Computer Science and Engineering Department, and he became the webmaster for the first open web network, one not restricted to an individual or small group of companies, in the Pacific Northwest. Davis had aspirations to work with a startup, however, and didn't last long at the university. The following summer, he became a programmer for the Seattle internet company called Uspan. He created a hyperlink program, which allows internet surfers to jump from one internet site to another by clicking on the link, but abandoned it when he discovered the Mosaic web browser. Mosaic was developed at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, NCSA, at the Urbana-Champaign campus of the University of Illinois, becoming the first, and many people still feel, the best, browser to take advantage of the newly created World Wide Web. Davis hoped to integrate his hyperlink program into that browser, and contacted Mark Andreessen, a smart computer science student at the University of Illinois, who co-developed Mosaic. If that collaboration had worked, Davis might have joined Netscape Communications, which Andreessen later founded, and made his fortune there. But Mosaic and Davis's hyperlink system were too incompatible, and Davis had to look elsewhere to join the new wave of bright engineers and entrepreneurs hoping to build new products and companies on the internet. So Davis decided to check out this new company starting up in Seattle. He was initially reluctant to join such a raw company, but he was impressed with Jeff and his vision of creating a virtual bookstore online. "I thought he would be interesting to work for," said Davis. He met with Kapan in October, and the two seemed compatible, so he joined the team as employee number 2, the first of many former UW engineers Bezos would hire. Neither Kapan nor Davis had much experience creating the kind of retailing or business software that Amazon.com needed, but Jeff's philosophy was to hire people with the most talent rather than the most experience. After all, they were trying to do something new, and experience with legacy software could be more of a hindrance than a help. It's a philosophy promoted by Silicon Valley startups that the best people are those who don't know that something can't be done, and therefore will figure out how to do it. Bezos is a strong believer in this philosophy. He and these two men developed the core software that launched Amazon.com, programs that ran the company for years. The third employee of the company was Jeff's wife, Mackenzie. She handled the phone calls, ordering and purchasing, secretarial duties, and accounting. She had to learn the last job by taking up a simple accounting program, Peachtree PC accounting software. Jeff didn't hire a real accountant until the summer of 1996. At the time, Amazon.com was still a bare-bones garage startup, with nothing but a desk made from a door, and a network router Jeff had bought online from the internet shopping service, no doubt in order to check out an online shopping network. He also checked out the capabilities of the other fledgling online booksellers. He bought How to Be a Computer Consultant from Computer Literacy's clbooks.com. It was just a few months after arriving in Seattle that Bezos decided to take a class on how to create a bookstore. Howarth, the instructor who gave the famous lecture on customer service, remembers Jeff from the class. He recalls that Jeff was evasive about his plans. Many of the participants would have meals together, sometimes talking about subjects they didn't want to raise in class. At one meal, Howarth asked Jeff what he wanted to do after the course. "I'm not really sure," he lied. It wasn't that unusual, since many of the students were reluctant to give away information that might tip off a competitor, such as where they wanted to open their store. On the last day of class, Howarth said goodbye to Jeff. I said, "I'm not really sure what you're going to do, but I have a feeling you'll be successful." What led him to that conclusion? I could tell he was bright and quick, says Howarth. I had no real idea, but the way he was deeply mysterious about it, I could tell he was doing some deep thinking about it, a lot of planning, and he had a very friendly smile. Howarth had no idea that the smiling Jeff who took his course would become a major competitor of virtually every bookstore on earth, until a few years later at an American Booksellers Association conference. I saw Jeff and recognized his face, but I was not sure from where, he recalls. Maybe someone from my hometown. I asked him how he was doing. Then I looked at his shirt, and it said Amazon.com. I suddenly knew exactly who he was. I said, "Oh my God, it's you." I didn't know Jeff Bezos had been in the class. With an introductory course in bookselling, some experience buying a few items online, one computer, 2 engineers, his wife, and a garage, Bezos was ready to start building an online bookstore.